The main topic today, or the main bit that I'm going to cover, is really about how data quality is key to effective AI. And it's the same with CRM, it's the same with any system. Your AI systems are only going to be as good as the data that you're feeding it. So in order to kind of explain this, we're going to drop into a bit of like a case study. An example, sorry. We're looking at Spark Inc. They've just launched a new product, and the commercial team needs to create a GTM strategy to actually reach the right audience and to drive it forward. So the first thing that we need to do is to ensure that the data actually connects to the business objectives. Okay. And I know that it sounds really like silly almost, but a lot of times people don't really have that link, and you're setting yourself off on the wrong footing if you're not really drilling into those objectives to figure out where the data can sit. So the way that we would normally do that is we will map out an ICP, so an ideal customer profile. And then with that, we put in the core data points that we need to actually build this strategy and link into your business objectives. So for example, we're looking at things like industry, geography, company size, decision makers, and then the different tech platforms that they will use. But this needs to be specific to every company because no two ICPs are the same. Okay. Once we understand the data points and the objectives that we're aiming for, then with HubSpot, we can now map the total addressable market. So before you would have to do this across spreadsheets, but with Breeze, you can now basically build this in HubSpot. So you can look at your total addressable market, and then you can also set up intent so that you know what companies are essentially showing any intent towards your product, and then how many companies you've got captured as well. So once you've kind of done that, you've got your objectives, you've segmented your market, and you understand it. At that point, you need to start to think about how you gather the data in order to create your processes and drive your product forward. And this is where you need to start to really think about your data and assess its quality. Because again, if your data isn't accurate and isn't complete, then you're not going to get good insights. And then that's just going to lead to wasted time, wasted effort, and a lot of frustration. So whenever we say ensuring that your core data points are understood, you also need to ensure that they're actionable. So going back to Spark, if we look at this sort of data that we pulled out, they have 9,000 UK accounts with regional data. They have 55,000 UK accounts in their CRM, but 50% of those are inactive. They're missing core data points that are required for the business objectives we've outlined. So again, here, we just don't have the correct data. We don't have the correct segments. And over 7,000 of the accounts aren't actually mapped into a segment here. So based on this, if I was to feed this into an AI, I'm not going to get good information out of it because we don't have the core data points in place. And again, so I'm going to sound like a broken record through this entire webinar, but again, poor data quality, it doesn't just create frustrations and inefficiencies, it does have tangible business implications as well. So sales and marketing teams, they waste a huge amount of time correcting errors instead of actually focusing on selling. Wasted resources, again, marketing campaigns, whenever they're targeting outdated contacts, you see a lower ROI. You see a lower ROI, you're going to get less budget. It creates a negative feedback loop. In terms of a poor customer experience, if you're using outdated or incorrect customer information, it starts to damage trust. And like personal example, if I get an email that says, "Hi, Alan," or "Hi, Adam," like I immediately put it in the spam box. Again, because there's no point in saying what you care about the customer if you can't even get their name right. So it's about focusing on all those data points to improve the experience. And then from an internal position, it's really about adoption. I mean, take it from me, if your sales team don't trust the data, then they will not use the CRM. They don't use the CRM and they start to use different data sheets, spreadsheets, notepads. It just leads to a lot of wasted time and a lot of frustration for them, but also for managers. And putting some numbers behind this, 15 million is wasted annually from poor data quality across businesses. 21% of marketing budgets get wasted on bad data. And again, that impacts your next year's budget, next quarter's budget. And 27% of SDR's selling time is actually wasted on them just following bad prospects or basically using bad data to prospect as well. Okay. So in the next couple of years, I mean, we're all deep into AI now, but it's going to get even more powerful. And like AI-powered insights and automation, decision-making, they're all going to become a lot more entrenched in what we do. And just to say it again, if your data is not right, you're not going to get the outcomes that you need from your AI. So you're basically setting yourself up for failure. Okay. So how does data quality actually impact AI? First thing, compromise performance. If you're given bad data in, then whenever your AI is trained on bad data, it's going to give you bad outputs. It can also give you biased outcomes. So if you've got poor data quality or badly structured data, then it leads to, well, basically biased outcomes or just wrong outcomes as well. To give you guys an example, we recently changed the structure of our sales pipelines. We were playing around with AI and we were getting it to look at all of our deals, but we actually realized we had one for partners and one for us internally. What that meant was it was giving us outcomes that we're saying we should be going after these sets of this industry because we're going to close in this industry like every time, but we were actually double counting because of the structure of our CRM. So really by understanding the structure of your CRM and your data, you're going to get better and unbiased objective outcomes as well. And finally, increasing costs. Anybody who has had a CRM for like 6 months knows that going in and fixing the CRM once bad data is in there it's a hell of a lot of work. Because once you put the data into the system, it creates dependencies on workflows, emails, forms, all of these little niggly bits, but are really difficult to fix. So you're better to basically fix it at source instead of putting it into the system and then finding out that you're kind of stuck now. You're gonna have to work twice as hard to figure it out. Okay. In terms of the benefits of data quality and AI, whenever you get it right, your team are able to prospect and target new customers more effectively. You can identify upsells and opportunities way more effectively as well. You get better account insights, and we're going to show you some of that later on. You can optimize your territory planning and your lead writing a lot more accurately and easily. It improves your CRM adoption rates across your sales teams. Again, this is one of the main benefits because if you get your sales team entrenched in the CRM, they're going to sell more. It's going to basically help you guys. And finally, it starts to give you improved feedback loops on your tools. Because as you start to use AI more, then you learn more about your accounts, more about your data, then you're actually increasing the quality of your data. And all that does is creates a positive feedback loop where the quality and accuracy of your insights get better, you win more, you get more insights. Okay. So I'm just going to stop there. And if there's any questions, if anyone wants to just put them into the chat, happy to sort of go through them now.
Yeah, Adam, we had a good question about defining target markets across different products and how to use HubSpot's buyer intent tool. I think I've got it answered in the Q&A with the typed out answer, but if that didn't answer your question, feel free to pop that in again and we can address it. But I haven't seen any other questions come in yet, Adam.
Okay, no worries. Well, I say within the target account tool, you can have multiple target, basically target markets within the tool. You can also set up really granular insight rules. So it's kind of, how would I put this? If you've ever used 6sense or any intent platforms before, you can now just do that within HubSpot. So again, it's a saving in terms of the tooling costs, but also having that data at the fingertips of your sales and your marketing teams makes it really powerful because, as you say, it takes 5 clicks and you can have a high intent targeted campaign already set up. So it's really good. Yeah. But yeah, just moving on in this. The first thing that you need to do is actually assess the quality of the data in HubSpot. And this basically the best way to do this is actually define how your different teams are using it and to create that cross-team alignment. Like that can be a little bit in the weeds, but just to explain, you need to first define the objectives that your business is looking at, then link that to your data, then figure out how your customer data is being used, and then finally where it's being stored. So what normally happens is that in an organization, you may all be using similar data points, and then you're trying to link those to your objectives, but people are using the same data points in an inconsistent way. So, for example, we recently did a CRM implementation. They had a property which was, what is your gender? They had another property for are you male? Are you female? And then they had another property for biological sex. They basically had 4 properties that were showing and telling them the exact same thing. So they didn't really understand what the consistent use of their data was. And that just leads to a lot of mess in the CRM. And basically it makes it harder to get accurate data. So once you understand what the team's objectives are and what data points they're using, you really need to build a consistent structure and definition of all the data points to help people actually put them into the system well. Because again, if we're trying to put the same property in 4 times, you're going to get maybe 4 different answers, or you might just not get accurate data whatsoever. Once you've got a consistent understanding of the different data points, then you start to bake processes in to improve your data quality. Anybody who's worked with me knows that I constantly harp on about naming conventions. It's boring, but they're really effective. Essentially, you should create a naming convention tool or have a consistent naming convention so that everything that gets created in the system can be organized and can be formatted in a way that actually makes it easy to understand. The next thing you need to do is to set up pipeline and lead automations. These can be clear properties that are put into your pipelines and are made mandatory so that things can progress without having the right information in the right place. And then also building in lead automations so that you can quickly identify and use the data well in things like lead scoring, but also it helps you to identify what data points you don't need. So setting up lead automations and pipelines, it's a must for any CRM. And finally, you need to understand the fill rates or the completion rates of your properties. Now, what we mean by this is you could have a property and it could be critical to a business process, but whenever you actually dig into this, you'll find that the completion rate of that property is really low. So going back to actually getting good insights from your AI, if you've only got 50% fill rate on industry, for example, you're not looking at your full data set because you don't have complete data in there. And completion rates are really important because, as I'll explain on the next slide, the way that we look at it, we kind of split into these 4 quadrants. So if a data point is essential, but it has a low completion rate, then you need to build in a process to get your team to actually fill that in. So you need to make it mandatory, put it on your forms, basically figure out a way, or even just train your team to ensure that that completion rate goes up for that property. On the flip side, if it's not relevant and it has a low completion rate, really that shouldn't be in the system. You should just be taking it out of the system because people think that more and more data is a good thing, but it actually becomes really noisy and hard to get insights from it unless you start to clear out your system.
Adam, a quick question we had. How do you actually get that completion rate then?
So you can kind of do it in 2 ways. If you've got Operations Hub, which is a really useful, it's a really powerful tool in HubSpot, and it's extremely useful. You can go in and it will show you the completion rate breakdown of all of the properties that you have in the system. But you do need to go in on a property by property basis. The more effective way to do it is to look and basically take a year's worth of data, put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then run a formula, which we can share sort of at the tail end of this session. And that will calculate the completion rate on every single property as well. Once you've done that, then you can go in and apply conditional formatting to basically create a bit of a heat map to understand where you're missing data and where your completion rates are high. So it's very easy to do, just people don't really know how to do it.
Got it. Makes total sense. And then the other question that was, are the examples you have here, are those kind of like typical as far as like easy things like, industry and like create date, things like that, having a higher completion rate? Or are there specific properties or areas where you're like, okay, typically I expect to see this have, one of the lower completion rates?
Yeah, so I mean, this is example data, but like record ID and create date, they're like fundamental properties. Their completion rate should actually be 100. But things like lifecycle stage, you would normally expect that to be around the 70% mark. What I would normally do is focus on the custom properties because HubSpot's default properties are kind of always going to get filled in. But if you create a custom property for a certain purpose and the completion rate's low, that means that something's probably broken in the process because people aren't adhering to it or you're not capturing that data from forms or other areas. So yeah, we did a audit recently where we saw, I think it was like 900 properties, and 600 of them had a completion rate of less than 2%. So somebody just went wild and created loads of them, but the team aren't using them. What's the point in having them in the system?
Got it.
Yeah.
Makes total sense.
No worries. Right. So just going back to this, again, if you've got really high completion rates, but the data is actually relevant, then you need to go back to your team, speak to them to understand why they've collected this data in the first place and does it add value. And then finally, you need to look at where you've got a high or critical property and you've got a high completion rate, understanding why the completion rate is so high and trying to bake that process into the rest of your data points so that you've got a really high completion rate. Like, and why this is useful for AI. Basically, if you don't have high completion rates, then your AI's got a smaller data set to work off. And once, if it's got a smaller data hub to, data set to work off, then that means you're going to get worse insights, you're going to get biases, you're basically going to hit all the negative points that we touched on at the start of the presentation.